Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos and welcome to my guide to Siege of Boralus plus 21. This footage was taken just before patch 8.1 came out, so in the final hours of patch 8.0, and a number of things have changed since then, so I'm going to point out all of those as they happen, but I feel like there's still quite a lot of interesting stuff that happened in this run. The first thing you'll notice is that I'm playing a Subtlety rogue, which has received some changes since then, mostly in the nerfing direction, so this may or may not be something that we'll continue to do in this dungeon going forward. The other thing you'll notice there is that this Wave Tender's actually come in and gotten in combat with us right at the start of the dungeon. The Wave Tender is normally infested during this infested pattern, but we used a trick where we dropped a Death and Decay right where she would spawn before we started the Keystone, and that got her in combat, and mobs that are in combat do not get infested. This trick has also, to my knowledge, been fixed in 8.1, so it's also not something that you'll be able to do going forward, but no big deal. We would just, in fact, many times it didn't work for us, and we ended up just killing the Wave Tender infested. One of the things about Subtlety rogues is that they do tremendous amount of damage to priority targets that are surrounded by unimportant adds, and that's kind of something that's true of most of the trash in this dungeon. So it actually ends up not being too bad if there's an infested in the middle of a pack, because the Subtlety rogue does so much priority target damage, as long as it can generate those combo points from all the nearby footmen and stuff that don't matter. So we start off by clearing all that off. The affixes this week were Tyrannical, Skittish, Bursting, and of course Infested. So pretty good week for pushing keys. That's why we were able to push keys of such high level as 21. This part here, there's two marksmen. One is infested and one is not. And I actually try and keep them DPS'd relatively evenly here. You'll see I'm switching my priority target now to the uninfested marksman, because I want them to both die around the same time, because they're marksmen, right? They're ranged units. They don't actually run to the same spot because they do ranged attacks. So killing the infested is not a huge priority at first, because they'll happily stand far enough away that they don't heal each other. So to be more efficient, I want to kill them both at around the same time. So that's what's going on here. There was a little bit of a problem there. Our Demon Hunter ended up getting killed by some footmen. That's part of the problem with Skittish Week also, is that just randomly your DPS can get killed if they rip threat. And that does happen from time to time, but it's much better to let that happen a couple times than to be really, really cautious with your DPS, in our opinion. So now we're entering the part of the dungeon. This part still behaves like this, where these Scrimshaw Gutters, they give one enemy forces count each. So you need 319 enemy forces before you complete the dungeon to get points. And they only give one enemy count if you had dealt damage to them before they die, and when you get close to them, they die automatically. So it's really important that you actually deal a point of damage to each of them before you walk close enough to kill them. And then one of those footmen there that we got in combat with, once the gutter next to them that they're fighting dies, the footman will actually get infested, because it's supposed to be infested as part of this week's infested pattern, but of course it's been in combat since the start of the dungeon, so it never had a chance to get infested. So it's really important that you get in combat with it as soon as the gutter dies, so that it doesn't ever drop combat and become infested. Otherwise you just have to deal with a lot more obnoxious stuff going on there. Now we're entering this pool. You'll see there's an infested in there. If we weren't playing with a Subtlety rogue, we'd consider CCing it and killing the rest of the pack first, but since we do have a Subtlety rogue, I'm able to just focus it down, focus the Gahoonies down, using all of the combo points and the Shuriken combo, which Shuriken combo has been removed from the game, but the way Shuriken combo works is that the way that it worked, rather, is that each target you hit with your Shuriken Storm beyond the first would increase the damage of your next Eviscerate by 8%. Now that is completely gone. So the Eviscerates have received about a 28% nerf under the circumstance where you're getting the full 5 points of Shuriken combo, but they're unchanged in single target, and they're less nerfed as there are fewer targets. One thing that's true about these marksmen here is they do this Molten Slug ability, and that's true of both the Boss Marksman and the Trash Marksman. The Molten Slug ability is a targeted, dodgeable fire damage ability, and what that means for us rogues is that it's both evasionable and Cloak of Shadows-able. So you'll see me using both of those abilities when I'm being targeted by Molten Slugs, particularly when I'm low health or when there's other healing that's going to need to be going out, to try and reduce the load on our healer during that incoming damage. And because particularly I like to get my evasion used as soon as I can, because there's not really all that much else you can do with it here. You'll see I'm getting targeted by the Molten Slug here. Could have cloaked that one, but I decided not to, because Cloak is a little bit more useful. I can use Cloak on the brackish bolts from the casters, whereas the evasion I can pretty much only use on the Molten Slugs. Now we're here in this other pack. Again, the goal is to not kill off these footmen so that I can use them for combo points to nuke down the targets that actually have more health. So the rest of the group is trying to be a little bit restrained on the AoE. It's not a huge deal if they end up dying off. Particularly, we don't want the rest of our group to lose all the damage from their Blade Dance type abilities. But if they can be a little bit restrained, and if they can find a way to not hit those, you'll see I'm going over there to try and generate the combo points from them. That's how valuable it is to actually, as a Subtlety Rogue, to generate those combo points. And you see here I found a time to cloak. I had bursting stacks on me, I was being targeted by a Molten Slug, and I was low health, so it seemed like a good time to use my cloak to stop all of that from being a problem. Now we kill off these final 2 marksmen. You'll see our healer ended up dying there from a hindering cut from the footman who was next to her. The way those footmen works is they flee at low health, but then once they are done fleeing, if you're next to them and the tank isn't, you're liable to get hit with the hindering cut, which is, it will target the tank if the tank is next to them, but otherwise it will target just whoever's next to them. And it does a lot of damage and reduces your haste by like 1,000,000, so it's just really obnoxious. We like for all of them to go on the tank if possible. Now we're fighting the boss here. We're leaving all the ads not CC'd so that I can generate combo points off of them, which is going to increase my single target. If you look at the numbers, like right now in the damage meters, pretty much all of my damage is actually going on Sergeant Banbridge, whereas the damage numbers from the rest of my group is a little bit more evenly spread between Banbridge and the ads. And then we've got another ad here, so now I'm generating 4 combo points every time I Shuriken Storm. That's great news. That's going to be really good at putting damage into Banbridge. See, I'm moving over and making sure that I'm hitting as many targets with my Shuriken Storms as possible, although there I ended up somehow only hitting 2 because Subtlety is not something that I had played all that much of before this week, actually. I'd only played it for Zool, for Mythic Zool progression in Uldir, so I was still learning a lot about this, and my instinct for Shuriken combo or Shuriken Storm range is not perfect. But that is something that you should be doing as a Subtlety Rogue. Even now, even with Shuriken combo nerfed, you still just want those combo points from the Shuriken Storm hitting as many targets as possible, and that part remains unchanged in live, so it's still very much worth doing to make sure that you're hitting as many targets as possible with the Shuriken Storm. Shuriken Storm in 8.0, which is the patch that this content is recorded in, dealt a lot less damage than it does now. They buffed the upfront damage of Shuriken Storm, so it would actually be killing off these ads faster, which would be kind of annoying because you'd be generating combo points for less time. And it would be more important to make sure that the priority target was being hit with the Shuriken Storm. You'll notice that a couple times here, I've elected to hit the 3 ads instead of the Sergeant himself with the Shuriken Storm, and that would be more of a damage loss now because more of the damage would moved into the storm itself. And you'll see there I threw a blind over on the faraway marksman. I wasn't able to generate combo points on it. It was dotted. We don't want its damage to be hitting us unless I'm making combo points off of it. And we broke out the marksman that was imprisoned over here because the sergeant ran next to it. So that's kind of the strategy for us on this boss, is basically CC whichever marksmen aren't going to be next to the boss and taking the incidental cleave and the subtlety combo point generation, and then leave the ones that will be next to the boss un-CC'd so that I can make my combo points off of them. Now here's another pull. These Marauders don't have very much health. The Wave Shaper has a medium amount of health, so I get to use my combo points from the Marauders to just nuke damage into this Wave Shaper, and you'll see that even though the Wave Shaper has way more health than these Marauders, I'm putting these 100k Eviscerate crits into it every other global, and that's going to just very quickly remove it from the game here. Then I'm switching the Subtlety target after that dies to the Irontide Raider, although unfortunately all these marksmen are dying off too because they have very little health. You'll see they only have 250k health compared to the 2 million of the Raider and the 1 million of the Wave Shaper. So now I'm just switching to the more anemic Subtlety single target rotation. If you look at my stats, which you can see up in the top left, I was playing very, very low haste and very, very high mastery. And that is, for Subtlety, that's going to be very, very good at priority target damage, so damage to one target when there are little ads nearby. But it's going to be quite bad at damage to one target when there aren't other targets nearby, because mastery increases the damage of your finishers, and your finishers as a proportion of your rotation go way up as you have more and more targets around. And also the haste, the energy regeneration from haste is not particularly helpful when you're on multiple targets, so that's why I'm so low on haste, because every time you generate these extra combo points, it ends up meaning that your rotation costs a lot less energy and you have a lot fewer globals where you're not doing anything. So haste ends up being pretty much useless because that's what haste helps you with as a Subtlety Rogue. But haste would be pretty good on a single target. I'm also playing with Azurite traits here. I'm playing with 2 copies of the First Dance. The First Dance was also changed since the time of this video, and it's still good now. It's different. It's different good now. It's good in a different way. But as it functioned in this video, the way it worked is that every time I entered my Shadow Dance, my next 2 Eviscerates or Shuriken Storms would have a bunch of extra crit or Shadow Strike. So I was, if you look every time I enter that Shadow Dance here, the next ability I do crits like almost always, and that's almost always a huge Eviscerate for 100k or whatever, 125k. Now Shadow Dance is a little different. You really want the first trait of Shadow Dance in M+ as a Subtlety Rogue now, because it makes your Shadow Dance give you combo points and haste, which is really quite good, particularly even on single target. It's very good, but it's not. It was really, really good for the way that we played Subtlety in these dungeons, where we kept bringing the little ads around all the priority targets. In some dungeons where we were running Subtlety, you had to do a lot of work to enable this. Like in Shrine of the Storm, for instance, where we've got a Subtlety run that I may have a video of coming out soon as well. In that dungeon, we would do a lot of work to pull little ads next to bosses. But in this dungeon, you basically don't actually have to do any work to make Subtlety good. There's just naturally all these areas where there are tons of marauders or footmen or whatever, or the ads themselves have ads, or the bosses themselves rather have ads. So this is actually one of the dungeons where you really don't have to work to enable Subtlety. It just kind of does what you're already doing in the dungeon. And that's part of why I think this is such a good Subtlety dungeon, potentially even now with the spec being in its nerfed form. So this is part we're using the Ashvane Spotter. The Ashvane Spotter gives those little artillery circles, and those will damage enemies as well as friendlies. So we use it to clear out the enemy mobs around here as fast as possible. And then once all those are gone from this side, it's my job to just finish off the spotter. I could have been putting a little bit more damage into the spotter, and I wish I had been. I'd been trying to use the enemies to generate combo points to dump damage into the spotter. But it still was about 40% when everything else died, so that's an area where it could have saved a little bit of time as if I'd been able to pump even more damage into her. Now we're crossing this little boat here. You could be tempted to bring the spotter across the boat to help kill the stuff on the other side, but that's usually a trap. It's very difficult to actually get her successfully across because of the way the terrain works here. Now we're in this pool. This pool has an infested, which we're going to kill off. And then the commander is usually the next priority target. Commanders do a trample, which targets one person's location. It locks it in at the start of the cast, and then it charges at them. And then it stuns anybody it hits along the way and does a reasonable amount of damage. Commanders also do an annoying bolstering shout, which is like a 75% damage reduction on everything except the commander nearby. And you can Blood Elf that. It's annoying because it also affects Gahoonies, so if you ever have Gahoonies hit by that, you really need to make sure that they get dispelled so that you can kill them off successfully. You can't just wait for the bolstering shout to expire. But the commander is a great Subtlety target because it has so much more health than everything around it, and it gives everything else a bolstering shout, so it's more likely to be able to be the target that you actually need to deal the damage to. You'll see there we Blood Elfed all the bolstering shouts off of these things. Commanders are some of the mobs in the game that do not take damage from Ashvane Spotters, so when we later in the dungeon are going to be using Ashvane Spotters to kill packs that include commanders, it's going to be my huge focus to deal damage to the commander, because damage on all the other mobs is basically irrelevant. They're going to be dying to the spotter, and I am just there to use them to generate combo points to hit the commander. Now this pull is a nice fun one. The Cannoneer and the Spotter are the only two mobs that don't take damage from the Spotter. So we're going to kill off the rest of the stuff here using the Spotter circles. You can wait for the second circle to spawn in the same location before you move there, and you'll see I've placed two circles right on top of each other. That's a good way to make sure that you don't crowd the area too much. You just stand there, wait for one circle to be around you, wait for the second circle to be around you, and then you move, and that will let you keep them in a smaller and more confined area. And then, we're just using a bunch of the mobs will die really fast. The deckhands have a medium amount of health, but they do take damage from the spotter. So they're likely to survive a little bit longer than all of the marauders. The marauders are going to die pretty much in the first set of cannons. And then you just kill off the rest of the mobs here. It would have been kind of nice for my damage if the deckhands had gotten to stay alive. I would have been able to funnel more damage into the spotter and the cannoneer, but you can see they're already pretty low health. I've already done most of my job on them. And now just finishing off the spotter before we go into this boss fight. Now this boss fight we actually have a very cool Subtlety strategy for. It's not our strategy, we picked it up from somebody else, but I will show you how it works here. So the way it works is you engage this boss. She casts a gut shot unless she's slowed or been recently melee attacked, so that's a pretty important thing. It does a lot of damage, and you want to stop that from happening as much as possible. But she'll often get one off at the start of each phase here. Now we're just going to make sure that those deckhands don't actually jump down here. You can root them, you can blind them, you can imprison them, you can paralyze them on the ship. And then we've got this cannoneer here, and now we're just going to AFK for about a minute. And the way we're going to do this is we want... This phase is going to continue until the cannoneer dies and you shoot the cannon at the ship, and then the boss will come back down. Or about a minute later, there will be 3 extra deckhands that spawn, and then the boss will just come back down herself, even if you don't kill the cannoneer. So what we're going to do is we're just going to leave this cannoneer alive. We're going to sit here. We're going to wait for this phase to finish. We're going to keep rooting and imprisoning the deckhands that are on the ship. And then once those expire, those 2 deckhands will come down along with 3 new deckhands. And then we're going to have 5 deckhands, a cannoneer, and the boss. and that's going to be a ton of combo points for me, and I'm just going to funnel them into the boss. So here comes that spawn of 3 deckhands. I'm going to tricks them in. I should have tricks them in. I didn't actually click tricks there, so that was a creative play by me, not very good. And now, once those 3 come out, pretty soon after, the Dread Captain herself comes down. She gets 1 gut shot off, which is doing a lot of damage to the target, which ended up being our healer this time. And now we're just going to nuke this boss with all these combo points that I've got. It's pretty high damage on the tank when this happens, when you've got all these deckhands around. And the deckhands do like a frontal cone thing, and you'll notice that our druid used treants there to taunt them all to take some pressure off our tank, but that made those frontal cones be going in towards the treants, which ended up doing a lot of damage to me and the Demon Hunter as well, Zach. But it ends up being worth it here. If you look at this captain, she's got 9 million health, and her health is just vanishing here. And now she goes back up for a second up phase, but no new deckhands or cannoneers spawn because there are already deckhands and cannoneers out. We kill the first cannoneer and immediately go back to phase 1, kill the captain again. Lust again. We've got still 5 deckhands around the Dread Captain, so I'm getting maximum combo point and shuriken combo generation here. And if you look at the damage meters at the bottom, that's even including a minute of AFKing. She's just getting completely destroyed here by the eviscerates that I'm putting in from all this extra combo point generation from the deckhands. So yeah, this strategy, Subtlety Rogue will still be very good at this strategy in 8.1, as it is now on live today. It's going to be, these eviscerates will be hitting about 25% less hard, but still quite good. Now we enter another phase. Again, there are still deckhands alive, so no new deckhand spawn here, but there's no cannoneer alive, so a new cannoneer spawns, and I'm just switching my subtlety target to that cannoneer. These deckhands are going to start dying. You'll see that some of them are a little low, and that's fine. You know, most of the damage is already done. The boss is pretty low. I'm using my cloak here to just stand in and keep killing this cannoneer. I don't need it for anything else, and that's the goal here, is just kill off this cannoneer, get out of this phase as fast as possible, summon the boss, hopefully with some deckhands still alive so that I can keep making a couple combo points. But at the end of the day, I think she's low enough health that we don't even need my subtlety damage on her anymore. Yeah, she's coming down at 23% health, so about 2 million, and she's not going to be withdrawing for another 30 seconds. So we have 30 seconds to deal 2 million damage. That shouldn't be too much of a problem for us, even without any extra targets for me to generate combo points off of. And you'll see now I'm switching to, Shadow Strikes instead of Shuriken Storms. The way it works is you want to be Shadow Striking during your Shadow Dance if there's only 2 targets around, and you want to be backstabbing if there's only 1 target around. That's the subtlety rotation. I'll maybe make a guide on subtlety at some point in the future, once I get a little better at it. But yeah, that's the boss dead. Huge damage brought by our whole group, even with that AFK, because the way it works is, you AFK that first transition, but then the second transition is basically over instantly. So it ends up being a lot faster than it might feel, just because you upfront, you put all of the AFK time on the boss up front, and you don't have to deal with any AFK time later. And if you look now, we're approaching the end of this dungeon, and we still have 18 minutes left on this 21. We're just smashing through this place. Loads of extra time, enough time to even commit a couple of mistakes, which we may end up doing here on a 21, which is pretty impressive. This Bilge Rat Demolisher is the target here that has way more health than everything else. So once again, it's a good trash pull for subtlety. I'm just going to be putting my damage into it. And you'll see here I actually got targeted by it. I should have probably vanished here to make it not be attacking me anymore, because I ripped threat with Skittish, but I didn't do that, so that's why I died. No harm, no foul, though. Everything's still fine. The graveyard updates to be quite close to here, so it's actually not that bad if you die when the graveyard is close. It only costs you about 5 seconds, whereas if you die sometime where you're going to have to wait to get rezzed, it makes Trash Pull take a lot longer. And that's one of the interesting things about Mythic Plus, is that there are some deaths that end up costing you the whole run, and there are other deaths that end up costing you 5-10 seconds only, or sometimes even less if it ends up being beneficial to you in another way. So we kill off the Demolisher before any of these little Bilge Rat, pirate, monkey things. Now we're just focusing them down. I'm always, as the Subtlety Rogue, basically going to be hitting the highest health target, unless there's a target that is a huge priority to kill there. The Tempest is the most threatening of those. There's a silence cast called Choking Waters that it does, which is a problem, and also a heal called Revitalizing Mist, and between that there's just nukes on people. So now we're going to do a Shroud skip, is the plan here. Just got to get my buffs back up, though. Battle Shout, Scroll, Augment Rune, and I'll eat this Feast real quick. And now we're going to Shroud through to the next part of the dungeon here. We want to skip these Pillagers and these Demolishers. They're a little bit inefficient, and we'd rather pull more earlier. We got a bunch of credit from the Scrimshaw Gutters that we were tagging, getting those 1 points on. There are even 4 of them that are on the other side of the map from us that you can tag and get 4 extra enemy forces count from. And now we're just going to kill off these snipers using the spotter here. The snipers actually do a ton of damage, so I'm looking to get like a kidney shot. I got a kidney shot on one of them there. Those shoots do a lot of damage, but I evasioned, and a lot of the shoots and ricochets were targeted on me, and because I was evasion, they didn't actually end up having any effect there. Then we're using our AoE stuns, and if you look, that ended up going very, very well for us. We've had trouble with that pull in the past, and one thing you can do is you can actually CC the snipers, and they won't get broken. CC doesn't get broken by the spotter's cannon barrages, so you can use that to kill mobs even while they're CC'd. That's something we do make use of from time to time, but we felt like it was faster to just get in there and kill them with the spotter and our own damage. Now, I'm here targeting this commander. Commander is going to be my focus target. All of the other mobs in this pull will die to the spotter that we're bringing with us to kill all this stuff. And I'm just going to use the artillery barrages on me, so I'm just putting those circles under the mobs there. You'll see I kind of missed with that fourth circle. I could have done a better job of coming around to like where the tank was. Now I've got threat on the commander. Snap taunts it back. Is very often, as a subtlety rogue on skittish weeks, you're going to pull threat on the priority target. You got to make sure that you're using Tricks of the Trade on cooldown, but even then, Tricks of the Trade is only active for 5 seconds of every 30, so you're going to be making a lot of threat, and it's going to be all on one target. It's not spread evenly among all the targets that the tank is AoEing. And now these mobs are all dying off here. This gets a little sketchy. If you can't kill these mobs off quickly with the cannons, they're going to do a ton of damage. Ashvane snipers in particular, that ricochet ability, just does huge amounts of damage to the group. And the commander as well, if they stun people in unfortunate places and at unfortunate times with the trample, that can be also a run-ending event. We've had a lot of trouble doing these pulls here in the past, but we've eventually, in this run, we ended up doing them pretty well. It's possible to do all the mobs in that square at once, but that is very, very sketchy, and we felt like we were way ahead on time, so we didn't need to do anything that risky. We would absolutely be doing that, though, if we felt like we needed to defeat the timer. But since everything has gone well so far this run, we ended up thinking we could do this in 2 pulls rather than in 1. Again, here, targeting the commander, there was an infested in the previous pull. We just made sure to CC it when it got close. One thing to note here is that if you ever actually pull the boss, you can reset it down here in the area that we're fighting right now, but it will pull all of the trash in the room to you. So if you're not ready for that, that can be bad. On the other hand, if you are trying to pull all the trash in the room, you can just tag the boss, and that will accomplish that too for you. So now, going in there, I was just looking to make sure that the boss wasn't in a bad spot, and I needed to distract it. Now I'm going to use a very cool trick here. I've had enough of this dungeon. I'm getting out of here. I'm Harthan. So I pop my cloak, I pop my evasion, and I'm gone. I don't want to be part of this group anymore. These guys are stupid, and I want to go home. No, that's not. That's obviously not what's happening. What's happening here is now we've done most of the dungeon, we've done all the parts with priority targets, and for these last 2 bosses, it's just single target encounters. So while they're mopping up that spotter and the infested mob, I'm going to switch to assassination for these last 2 fights. I set my Hearthstone just outside the dungeon, so I hearth there, switch my gear into assassination gear, and run back into the dungeon, and because the graveyard was updated to where the second boss was, I'm going to zone back in right there, and you can either shadow step or get life gripped over this little barricade here, so I don't even need to stealth around and get back there. You'll see our priest in position to grip me up, and here we are. I get there just as the spawns of Gahun die. Perfect timing. Put my poisons on my daggers, and now I'm playing assassination for these last 2 single target style boss fights. Which will be quite a lot better than the subtlety I was playing, particularly because my subtlety was so mastery heavy and haste light. It was just not a particularly good single target thing, and I get to play assassination here with talents like poison bomb, so that I'm very, very much all in on being a single target spec with this. And that's going to help with these last 2 big tyrannical bosses, where not only is the damage important, closing the fight out faster is going to be good for healer mana, and that's important here. Now, Tidal Surge, this ability is not actually, it was not mandatory to dodge this ability when we were doing this Keystone, because in 8.0, Tidal Surge didn't actually scale with Mythic Plus level. It just did 40,000 damage, regardless of difficulty, from anywhere from base Mythic up to Mythic 30 or whatever. It didn't scale. Nowadays, in 8.1, it is a scaling ability. So you really need to make sure you dodge that, because it is going to one-shot you on any kind of Mythic Plus, at any sort of reasonably high Mythic Plus difficulty. It does loads of damage. It would be absolutely one-shotting everybody if it were to hit them on this difficulty in 8.1, but since it's back in 8.0, it wasn't behaving that way, which is nice for us. We, sometimes we'd soak it, even though it only did 40,000 damage. That's still enough to combine with Breakwater to be a problem. So You'll see here I'm using my cloak to both be able to stand in for this wave, although I kind of cloaked a little early, so my cloak is going to be down for the wave, and I ended up taking the damage from it after all. But cloak also can prevent the damage from the breakwater, which is the main source of group damage that goes out in this fight. Breakwater does a ton of damage to everybody. It is frost damage though, so it is immunable with Cloak of Shadows. In the boss fight here, you'll notice our tank is kind of standing in the hitbox, just inside the hitbox. That's because that Crashing Tide frontal ability, actually the first circle that it spawns, the first frost circle that it spawns, is outside of the boss's hitbox. So if you're standing just inside the boss's hitbox, you don't even have to move as the tank, which is pretty useful. So we make good use of that, and that means that our tank doesn't have to do a lot of repositioning of this boss. This boss is pretty easy. The only real threat is those breakwater damage AoE on everybody, and then of course the Tidal Surge. Now that it's live, now that Tidal Surge is a one-shot on live, you do need to make sure that you dodge those, and that if you're standing near one of the 4 edges of the room, you could potentially be standing where a Tidal Surge might spawn, and that would be very, very bad. So you see where Zach and I are standing, if a Tidal Surge were to spawn on that left side of the room, we would be potentially one-shot without having an opportunity to react. So you've got to position yourself so that you have opportunity to react, and then you just get behind that middle statue of the room relative to wherever the wave is coming from. But yeah, this boss is going to fall over here. You'll notice I'm not battle shouted. I should really be battle shout scrolling. I've got a nice little weak aura up in the top right of my screen there, the top middle-ish right of my screen, that lets me know if I don't have food, stamina, or food buff, flask, augment rune, or battle shout. But I'm kind of ignoring it because I don't usually look during a boss fight. I'm usually focused on kind of the middle, a square that's maybe the middle half of my screen only. I don't really look at all of the other information that's around at the sides of the screen. Most of that information, is just extra stuff that you can use. Like you can see the rotation I'm clicking up in the middle top left of the screen. You can see my stats. You can see the group's real-time DPS, which is a rolling average of the last 5 seconds of our group DPS. And you can see my talents and Azurite traits, which of course have changed since I switched from Subtlety to Assassination. And this build is the Assassination build I'm playing with Internal Bleeding and Poison Bomb is specifically designed to be good at these last 2 boss fights. Internal Bleeding is going to end up being pretty good against the Tentacles on the last boss fight. So now we're coming in with 8.5 minutes for this last boss fight. We have more than enough time to take it slow. This last boss fight in the dungeon has also received some changes since 8.0. So now that we're here in 8.1, this last boss fight has gotten a little bit harder. We use a strategy that is no longer viable on this fight, but I'm going to explain to you how and why that change is made. And you'll potentially actually just be able to see why the change is made after you see what strategy we use to shave a couple seconds off this boss fight. So the way this boss fight works is that there are 3 platforms, and you need to kill the gripping tentacle on each platform. And on each platform, there's 1 demolishing terror to start with. And then there will be up to 5 total demolishing terrors on the platform. And they will spawn either when you kill the last demolishing terror, or if you're slow, just a new one will spawn anytime. Our strategy for this fight on Tyrannical is we're just going to kill all of the demolisher tentacles on the first 2 platforms. The first 4, we're going to switch all of our damage onto them when they spawn. And then once the 5th one spawns, we are going to let that one get cleaved down while it's tanked by our tank, and get cross-dotted by me and our Moonkin, and focus the rest of our group's damage on the Gripping Terror, which has way more health than a Demolishing Terror does. It's possible that you can, particularly on lower key levels or on fortified weeks, that you can just nuke down the Gripping and try and kill it before more Demolisher tentacles spawn. The Demolishers will stop spawning once you kill the Gripping, so if you can kill the Gripping fast enough, you might not have to kill all 5 of the Demolishers there. You'll see I stood in some swirlies there. That was really bad news. Luckily, we have battle reses this dungeon. I think we have all of our battle reses, but that was really bad there. The way that I advise dodging those is to move towards the water. You can stand in the water for a brief amount of time and not actually get affected by anything negative. Unlike the other parts of Siege, standing in the water doesn't get you eaten by a shark on this boss fight. It just gets you constricted by a constrictor tentacle. But you have a little bit of time. You have like 5 seconds of being in the water before that happens. So ducking into the water to avoid those blue swirlies is a good strategy. The swirlies also don't all arrive at the same time. They have a bit of a travel time to them, so you need to be reacting very quickly if you're in melee here. You'll see there I'm using Cloak to remove my debuff. The way it works is that 2 debuffs go out at once. They can be, we use Mass Dispel whenever it's available to hit 2 with 1 cast. Otherwise, 1 gets dispelled and the other person just has to wait and get healed. The dot does a ton of damage, so whoever is waiting to get healed ends up needing to be focused, or waiting to get dispelled needs to be focus healed while they are taking that dot. You can also use Anti-Magic Shell, our Death Knight. If you Anti-Magic Shell after you get the debuff, you will just absorb some of the damage from the ticks. But if you Anti-Magic Shell before the debuff goes out there, you'll see our Death Knight just did that. You can see it is being aimed at you because it has an animation and a travel time. The Putrid Water debuff does. It's like a little spit thing from the boss. If you Anti-Magic Shell before it lands on you, it will not apply to you at all, and you won't need to get dispelled. So our Death Knight is pre-AMSing those whenever possible, and that is a very good way to save healer mana and save damage on our whole group, because then the other person can be immediately dispelled, which is very good. I think you can also use Metamorphosis Leap. The leap component of the Metamorphosis ability from the Death Knight, I think, also makes you immune, or from the Demon Hunter rather, also makes you immune to getting that debuff applied to you. So if you time that perfectly as well, you can get that to happen too. You can also pre-cloak it, but pre-cloaking isn't all that important because cloak itself also removes the debuff, so that's not that important to do. Once again, on the second platform, our strategy is we're going to kill the first 4 Demolishers with the whole group, and then while the 5th Demolisher, the final Demolisher, is up, we're just going to let it get cleaved down while it's tanked, because the real threat is if there are 2 Demolishers up at the same time, the one that is not being tanked will just start casting Hull Cracker, and that will just murder the whole group. So you need to make sure that all the Demolishers are tanked. We do have a little bit of wiggle room for this. We have My Evasion, we have Netherwalk from our Demon Hunter, and we have Treants from our Balance Druid. So those give us a little bit of wiggle room after a Demolisher spawns before we actually need to kill off the other one. But it's better to not fall behind on these things. It's better to just be killing it. You'll notice our Demon Hunter there actually got aggro and died. But again, we have a million battle reses because we were geniuses earlier in the dungeon, so it doesn't matter if we flub this fight a little bit, as long as we don't flub it in a really, really bad way. One thing that's also true about the Demolishers is you have a little bit of a grace period after they spawn before you need to tank them. So the way it works is they'll spawn, they'll flail around for a little while, they will melee anybody who's next to them at that time, but if there's nobody next to them, they won't cast Hellcracker. Then they cast a Slam, and after they cast their first Slam, then if they're not being tanked, they will start casting Hellcracker. So you can use those 5 to 10 seconds of grace period to kill off the old Demolisher. Just make sure that nobody goes next to that Demolisher until the tank is there. Otherwise, they're going to get meleeed, even though nobody actually needed to tank it yet. Now we're just killing off this gripping here, and then we're going to move to the last platform. And the way our strategy worked on the last platform is we're going to Zerg it down. We're just going to focus the gripping. We're going to use all of our cooldowns. We're going to use Bloodlust. We're going to use Second Pots. And we're just going to nuke the Gripping Terror and ignore the Demolishing Terror completely. There's the first Demolishing Terror of the last platform. It was actually possible to not aggro it. You could just hug the left side and completely not aggro the first Demolisher. And then once the second one spawned, it could get tanked, and you'd have until the third one spawned before things would start to get dicey. And even once the third one spawned, you could handle it for a while by having Treants on it, having Me Evasion tank it for a little while. So you end up having a lot of time. So the way it works is that those terrors don't actually spawn until the cannon gets shot. So our tank is staying behind. He's going to use the cannon now to spawn the terrors, and we're going to kill off the... we're going to start work on the terrors here while our tank makes his way over. Unfortunately, our tank had used his anti-magic shell already to AMS, or to immune a dot, and then he got targeted by a second dot in a row, so he died while he was running over, and that was really, really bad. Now our Balance Druid is going over to Battle Resin, and that's costing our Balance Druid a ton of time on the Gripping Terror during his incarnation, during all his cooldowns. There's the B-Res. Again, they're hugging left as they come over, but now a second Demolisher is spawning, and this Gripping is still very high on health. So this is very, very, very bad news. I got hit there. I got meleeed by the Demolishing Terror. I didn't want to run away from it, though, because I didn't want to get next to Zach there, who had the dot on him, but I ended up getting knocked away by it being dispelled anyways. Now this Gripping Terror is going down, but there's a third Demolisher now, so that's going to start casting Hullcracker. That slam killed me there. I should have not dodged that way. Waffle Sauce also goes down because the Demolisher came next to him. Now it's going to be time to shoot this cannon once the repair happens, but Hullcrackers are going out, so huge damage going on everybody. Zach charges over to try and tank the Demolisher and just immediately dies to the first melee there. Our healer dies too to another Hullcracker, and now Snap manages to shoot the cannon at 49k health. If he'd died there, it would have been a wipe, would have been tragic, but we ended up getting it just at the end there. That's how we beat the Siege of Boralus on 21. Obviously, tons has changed about how our run worked versus live, but I hope I gave you some insight as to why they've made so many of the changes they did to Mythic Plus and how we used all the stuff in the way that it used to function. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like and subscribe and all that stuff. That'd be I'd really appreciate that. And you might enjoy some of the other content on my channel. Some of those videos should be up around on the screen now, so click on those. There's similar kind of content. I also have guides to stuff like the Rogue class and various affixes, Mythic Plus affixes. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.